All right, my friend, we are online.
Fantastic. Well, welcome everyone. Good morning to Zerha Spiritual Healing Center Sunday event, where we have a speaker, and today's speaker is Peter Hayes. I'll introduce him in a little while, and then we'll have hands-on healing afterwards with the meditation. But like we always do, we open up with a prayer to set the energy, the vibration. And today it's our lovely sister and Ian. Um, so can you open us up, Adriana and Ian, with a lovely prayer?
Yes, it's our pleasure. So, good morning, my friends from all over the world. I would like to invite you now at this beautiful Sunday morning to close your eyes and let's take a deep breath to invite the light, the love, and the teachings of our Master Jesus Christ. Let's open our minds, our hearts to learn the action and reaction effects and all the teachings around this beautiful passage that our special guest, Peter, is going to be sharing with us. Please allow us, God, to be present, to be able to incorporate the teachings of today's lecture. With that said, and with the protection of our guard angels, our mentors, we open this beautiful healing circle today with Peter and his beautiful wife joining us in this special Sunday morning service. Thank you so much for your presence. Let us begin our beautiful Sunday together as friends, as a beautiful family that we are. Amen.
Amen.
So be it. Thank you.
So
Thank you,
be it.
Adriana and Ian. So a Bezerra Spiritual Healing Center respects all religions and spiritual traditions. We're non-denominational. We're a member of the United States Spiritist Federation, and Spiritism's beliefs center around scientific, philosophical, and religious principles. Emmanuel taught knowledge and love are the wings for our spiritual evolution. And there's two parts. Participation is important. Your mentor is supporting with insights from the speaker today, and the mentor is always with you to assist you in your evolution. Reflection and working along the week to sustain the energy you are receiving while you're in the center, wherever you are in your life's progress. And the second part today will be hands-on healing, and that will be led by our dear sister Tanya. So with the announcements, I did put in the chat the events that we have, and I'll briefly mention them now. We have fraternal counseling every Wednesday. It's by appointment only, so schedule your time slot from 4 to 7 p.m. You'll talk with one of the BSH mediums that have an open heart to hear and talk. Send an email with your appointment request to info@bshcenter.org. That is in the chat, that email address. We also have Inner Transformation presented by our lovely sister, Sunshine. It's Emmanuel in the book Thought and Life told us that evolution demands that we develop new habits, that we detach ourselves from lower forms and walk towards higher stages of existence. Detaching old habits is not an easy task. So let's join hearts and forces to understand the tweaks that the high spirituality gives us so we can all succeed this journey. And this class is an offering from BSH in collaboration with Divine Light, which Sunshine Beck supports and presents every first and third Tuesday of the month from 6:30 to 8 o'clock Pacific time. Then we have the Spirits Book Study Group based on the first book of Allan Kardec series that will unveil incredible details from the spiritual world through more than 1,000 questions. And that is every Thursday from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time with our dear sister, Duska Sardek. And it's available via BSH Zoom. And it's at the same Zoom location as we are today. So, Music for Our Spiritual Soul, presented by our wonderful brother, Mark Carlos. Music is the purest form of art. Join and participate in this incredible expression of beauty. and it's every Friday from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Then we have the Introduction to Spiritism, presented by our lovely brother, Robbie Brown, every first and third Saturday of each month, excuse me, from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Time. Spiritism uncovers the path to the individual and the collective progress. Even if you're an advanced student, this meeting is giving and receiving. Join us. I know for myself, I've been through the Introduction to Spiritism, I think 3 or 4 times, and every time there's something new that I've learned. It's like reading a book or watching a movie, and the next time you watch or read, you discover something that you didn't recognize the first time around. And then last, we have the Spiritism for the Youth, a special way of bringing Jesus's message to our children, which is very important because the children are the next generation for presenting Spiritism to the world. So let's support our next generation in this path every second and fourth Sunday of each month from 8:30 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. Pacific Time. I present, but I present in union with everyone who participates. And that is available BSH Zoom and YouTube. And BSH Zoom is the same Zoom meeting that we're at right now. Website contains all this information, so you can always check back for more of the news. And with that said, as I scroll through the introduction, please pardon the time here. So before I hand over to the guest speaker, Peter Hayes, make sure your microphone is muted so there's no background music. So Peter will be talking on the subject of action and reaction based on the book by Andre Luiz. Peter Hayes is the president of Spiritist group Love and Light in Newark, New Jersey, where he has been an active member for nearly 20 years. He has done lectures in English about Spiritism within the United States and has participated in several U.S. Spiritist symposiums. Besides doing over 60 episodes of the radio program Living Spring on Kardec Radio, he was on the editing staff for the Spiritist book by the U.S. Spiritist Federation, and he did work on Love and Light's publications in English. Peter loves to play guitar, so he teaches kids and adults at Spiritist group Love and Light. This has led to regular visits to a New Jersey nursing home to perform music. Occasionally, Peter joins members of the New York City's Caravan of Love and Love group to visit nursing homes and veterans hospitals as well. He has a long background in theater as a playwright, literary manager, electrician, and carpenter. Peter has published several children's books with his wife, Brazilian author Betty, sorry for the pronunciation, Rosenzweig. Is that correct, or I'm off?
Rosenzweig. Rosenzweig.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Through their company, Sem Fronteiras Press, and with publishers in Brazil, Colombia, and the United States. With that said, please welcome Peter Hayes for Action and Reaction.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here. I had a slight technical problem, so I hope you can hear me okay. But I'm assuming we're good. Okay.
Yes, we are hearing you.
Great. Okay. I had to switch computers basically. So, okay. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for having me. It's great to be back at Bezerra Spiritual Healing Center. As a native of California, it's always a pleasure to be involved with the center out in the West. I'm going to talk today about the book Action and Reaction. It is by Andre Luiz, and it was psychographed by Chico Xavier. It is the 9th book in the Andre Luiz series, of which there are 15 books total. And this book was first published in 1956, so we're in the 65th anniversary. The premise of this book is that Andre and his colleague Ilario, who appears in a few of the other books, go to the lower zones to visit a place called the Mansion of Peace. Now, the Mansion of Peace is a place of rescue and a place of refuge. The Mansion of Peace is compared to St. Bernard Monastery, which does exist. St. Bernard Monastery, or Great St. Bernard Pass Hospice, which is what it's called nowadays, is a monastery that has been around for about 1,000 years. This monastery, the real one, is located on near the border of Italy and Switzerland. The Mansion of Peace is like St. Bernard's Monastery in that it is a place of refuge. But they also mention that St. Bernard's Monastery in Italy and Switzerland, it's surrounded by snow in the winter. And just like that monastery is surrounded by snow, St. Bernard's, or the Mansion of Peace in the lower zones, is surrounded by darkness. All the time, it is surrounded by darkness. The Mansion of Peace is in a rather dreary place. It is on the front lines of the lower zones. They call it the Mansion of Peace, but really it's described as being more like a citadel, a fortress, if you will. And there are some reasons for that. It is a place of hope, a place of rescue. It is a beacon of light in this very disturbed part of the spirit world, the lower zones. The purpose of the Mansion of Peace is that it's there to rescue spirits from the lower zones. And once they're brought into the Mansion of Peace, they're given aid, they're able to receive guidance, hopefully some rehabilitation, and then they either will stay there to plan their next incarnation on Earth, or they may go to another place in the spirit world for help. The director of the Mansion of Peace, his name is Druso, and his most reliable assistant, his name is Silas. And Druso and Silas appear in the book throughout, and they're very important participants in the book. In the very beginning of this book, Action and Reaction, Andre and Ilario are with Druso, the director, and they're looking out a window out at the lower zones. And again, the Mansion of Peace is like a citadel, a fortress, if you will, for a reason, because they're looking out the window, and Andre observes this incredible sight, which he describes as follows. A raging windstorm carrying a dark substance similar to airborne dirt swirled violently in a strange vortex like a dark waterspout. From the monstrous body of the dreadful storm, human faces emerged, twisted in horror, cursing and moaning. They appeared suddenly, linked to each other like enormous chains of creatures, holding on to each other in a moment of peril in their instinctive anxiety to prevail and survive. So these are spirits that are very unbalanced, very desperate. They're pleading for mercy and so forth, and they're all linked to each other, so many of them that they look like a dust storm. And Ilario's looking at this amazing sight, and he asks a very good question. He says, look, the Mansion of Peace is a place of refuge, a place of rescue. Why don't you open up the doors and let them in? The director, Druso, acknowledges his point, and he's a little sad at this moment, but then he says something that's very revealing. He simply says, rescue is only truly meaningful for those who actually want to be rescued. So there's a big hint about why the Mansion of Peace is the way it is. And there's a big hint about the way the lower zones work. Silas, the assistant to Druso, who helps Andre and Ilario and shows them many examples of spirits that suffer in the lower zones, elaborates on this idea by saying the following. Thousands of spirits are gathered here haphazardly, victims of their own insane and gloomy thoughts, When they finally overcome their state of trouble or anguish, which may last for days, months, or years, they are brought to our institute, which as much as possible avoids opening itself to minds that are still completely entrenched in constant rebelliousness. In other words, the Mansion of Peace is described like a citadel, a fortress, and it is, in part, because they need to protect themselves. They want to be a place of refuge, but only for those spirits that are truly ready to receive help. Many spirits don't want to receive help in the lower zones at the moment. And if they opened up the doors and allowed all these suffering spirits to come in, they would overrun the place. They would undermine its mission and its purpose because they wouldn't be serious about receiving help. So when the time comes for them to receive the help, then they can come in. There's an example. There are some spirits, after all, that are ready to receive help. And one of them, who's first introduced in chapter 3 of Action and Reaction, is a spirit named Antonio Olympio. And when he first is brought in, he's really in bad shape. Andre looks at him and he's deformed. His face is almost unrecognizable. He looks like he got hit by a car. And when they finally bring Antonio Olympio into the Mansion of Peace, Druso greets him, tries to comfort him. They give him passes, and they begin to open up his throat a little bit so that he can begin to speak. And when Antonio speaks, he has been suffering for a very long time. Antonio thinks he's talking to a judge because he feels very guilty, and he's ready to confess what he did. What happened to Antonio Olympio? Antonio Olympio killed his two brothers. Why? Because when he was still incarnate on Earth, he and his two brothers inherited a large amount of land in Brazil, a ranch. And the minute Antonio had this property, he immediately started really wanting to make a lot of money off of it. He saw the profit motive, but his two brothers had other ideas as to what to do. They just didn't want to participate in this. And so Antonio became very upset. And he also began obsessing more and more and more about wanting money. That became very important to him. And he admits here at the Mansion of Peace, I convinced myself that I could only be happy if I killed my brothers. So one day Antonio says to his two brothers, let's go out on this lake of ours, this gigantic lake, and we'll survey the property a little bit. And they said, okay. Before they go out, Antonio slips in their drinks tranquilizers. By the time he and his two brothers are out on their boat, out on the lake, they are very drugged up. That's when Antonio flips the boat over and all three of them plunge into the lake. Antonio's two brothers start pleading for help. They're too drugged up to swim and to save themselves. Antonio does nothing, and he waits for his two brothers to drown. The minute this happens, the property is essentially his, but he also starts to feel guilty about it. But he does compartmentalize his emotions, and he kind of shrugs that off, and he swims back to shore, and he convinces the authorities that the boat flipping over was an accident. And they believe him. And suddenly, Antonio and his wife, Alzira, have this gigantic tract of land all to themselves. And they become prominent citizens in the area. And they have a son named Luis. But Antonio Olympio's two brothers are enraged. In the spirit world, these two spirits become very shrewd and skillful obsessors, and they go after Antonio and his wife and their son. Once Alzira has Luis, and then after he's around the time of adolescence, she becomes very ill, and she becomes very distraught and suffers from fever and so forth, to the point that she becomes unbalanced, and she throws herself into the same lake that Antonio's two brothers drowned in. At this point, Antonio just has this nagging feeling that maybe his two brothers are around, but he can't know for sure. Sometimes he feels guilty about what he did. Other times he sort of compartmentalizes. Finally, Antonio himself discarnates, and in the spirit world, his two brothers are waiting for him. They torment him. They beat him up. They put him in a cave and they hypnotize him. They get him to relive the moment that he killed both of them over and over and over and over again. Antonio becomes entrapped in this cycle of guilt, this cycle of pain and suffering, emotional pain and emotional suffering. Meanwhile, his two brothers start going after Louise. Louise is now in charge of the land. He obsesses about wealth himself. He becomes miserly. He's surrounded by these miserly spirits. And meanwhile, the property starts to fall into disrepair. All of this is an example of what can happen to individuals when we develop these obsessive compulsive thoughts. And Antonio, his wife, Elzira, and their son all became vulnerable because of their greed, especially Antonio and Louise. Elzira, in the spirit world, was able to break away from this first, and she tries to help Antonio and wants help for Louise. And Silas will get involved in this directly with the help of Andre and Ilario. Andre, as I mentioned before, when he observes Antonio, when Antonio first shows up at the Mansion of Peace, Antonio's a mess. And he mentions that he looks deformed, and he mentions there's a lot of damage to his paraspirit. I'm just going to do a basic question in Spiritism. What is a paraspirit? Question 135 of the Spirits book explains that the paraspirit is the intermediary principle, and it's a semi-material substance. It's the paraspirit that unites the soul with the body. And so the paraspirit is the vehicle through which thoughts, ideas, and so forth that come from elsewhere can take root within us via our paraspirit. That's one possibility. And one of the things that action and reaction spends a lot of time talking about, and one of the main points of the book, is to talk about the way thoughts, compulsive thoughts, obsessive thoughts, can work their way into us and affect our paraspirit. Antonio's paraspirit is disfigured because not only of his actions, the killing of his two brothers, but all the tormenting and the hypnotizing done to him by his two brothers. And then it takes time at the Mansion of Peace to try to undo this damage. Silas mentions, in fact, we aren't even close to understanding all of the creative and agglutinative power contained in bursts and simple thought. And that is why we must do all we can to free human beings from all the disturbing expressions of their inner life. He goes on to say, thus when we dwell on voice or darkness, the mental forces that we exteriorize then return to our mind, forces which are reanimated and intensified by the elements in tune with them. Consequently, we reinforce the bars of the prison in which we thoughtlessly remain, making our soul a closed world, where the voices and images of our own thoughts combine with the suggestions of those who are in tune with our behavior, thereby imposing reoccurrent hallucinations on us and temporarily neutralizing our senses. This is part of what the book Heaven and Hell from the Codification is about. We create our own hell, if you were. We have the negative, obsessive, compulsive thought. We send that thought out into the world. We attract or attune ourselves to spirits with similar thoughts. And then all of this comes back to us, and it's even worse than it was when we started. And it can become a cycle like this. The more we obsess and become obsessive compulsive about certain ideas, desires, and so forth, which tend to be illusions to begin with, then we start getting into a tune with this. All of this is connected to the effects of action and reaction, or karma. At the very beginning of this book, when Andre and Ilario show up at the Mansion of Peace, they are there to study cause and effect, or as they put it, karma, the karma of the Hindus. In other words, they make a reference to Hinduism, and they certainly are wondering about what is karma and what's the nature of karma. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit by mentioning first that one of the major themes of action and reaction is that our actions, thoughts, and intentions attract energies of the same kind. Now, this can be a path to liberation depending upon what our thoughts and deeds and actions are, or as I've been explaining, it can be an entrapment. So while it sounds heavy, it doesn't have to be, because if we attune ourselves to the good and work for the good, then we can receive more liberation and support as a result. And all of this has to do with the subject of karma. So I'm going to spend a little time talking about the relationship between karma as understood in Hinduism and cause and effect as it's described in action and reaction. There's a book I'm going to share with you in a moment about the world's religions by Halston Smith. And there's a nice analogy that he describes in there in his chapter on Hinduism, when he talks about the process of reincarnation, which came from Hinduism, this idea. He mentions that spirits are in the first beginnings of our evolutionary stage, we're like bubbles inside boiling water. We emerge, we move up through the hot water, which is a metaphor for the process of life, the cycle of birth and death and so forth. And then as we move up through the hot water and as we expand, when we reach the top, it's like the expansion of consciousness as we learn more and more. There is a really nice version of the essential Hindu scriptures that have been translated by Ethnath Eswaran. He was a teacher. He taught at UC Berkeley for many years. Actually, I think he was there around the time I was living in Berkeley. And he, in his introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, he talks about karma. And he mentions that literally the Sanskrit karma means something that is done. Or you could say it's translated at times as being about work, action. Often this can be treated as a deed or action. The law of karma states simply that every event is both a cause and effect. In the book, The World's Religions by Halston Smith, he picks up on this and says that science has alerted the West to the importance of causal relationships in the physical world. Every physical event, we are inclined to believe, has its cause, and every cause will have its determinate effects. In other words, he's talking about classical physics for the physical laws of the universe. But he points out that India extends this concept of causation to include moral and spiritual life as well. And he goes on to say that to some extent, the West also believes in this. For example, as a man sows, so shall he reap, or we reap what we sow, we reap what we plant. There's this proverb: sow a thought and reap an act, sow an act and reap a habit, sow a habit and reap a character, sow a character and reap a destiny. And Smith tells us this is kind of how the West has put the point and understands what karma can be. But he also connects this to Hinduism and says the difference is that India heightens up and extends its concept of moral law to see it as absolute. It brooks no exceptions. In other words, whatever we do in life, whatever our thoughts are, we have to go through the consequences of them, no matter what. That can sound a little heavy. And sometimes it might be, but I'll say more about that in a moment. Eknath Easwaran mentions that we are responsible for what happens to us, whether or not we understand how. And often we don't realize what we're doing and what the effects really are going to be. It follows that we can change what happens to us by changing ourselves. We can take our own destiny into our own hands. So he drops a hint about responsibility, and also that we can change the direction that we are going in. We are not mere victims or not permanently trapped in which we have no way out of what we find ourselves in. Smith elaborates and says karma implies we have complete responsibility, something people frequently rebel against by locating difficulties outside of ourselves. In other words, a lot of times if we're having problems, we want to blame someone else or blame something else and not acknowledge that maybe we played a role in this in creating what we are living with at the moment. And Smith points out that Hindus see this attitude as being immature. Everybody gets exactly what is deserved. We have made our beds and must lie in them. Now, that can sound a little heavy. It can sound punitive, but that's not necessarily the point at all. It doesn't have to be punitive or all about punishment. And Eknath Easwaran points out that karma is sometimes considered punitive, a matter of getting one's just desserts. And this is accurate enough. But it is more illuminating to consider karma an educative force, to consider karma whose purpose is to teach the individual to act in harmony with dharma, not to pursue selfish interests at the expense of others, but to contribute to life and consider the welfare of the whole. So when we think of the effects of karma, and we see many examples in the book Action and Reaction, yes, it can look like they're being punished, these spirits that are suffering. But the real point of this is it's not about punishing for the sake of punishing. It's about education. And this is something that Spiritism emphasizes a lot. When we think about the consequences of the laws, moral laws, divine laws, it is for the purpose of education, not about punishment. Or as he puts it here, to be more in harmony with Dharma. So what is Dharma? I'll give you an example. Dharma is about our real nature. So there was once a wise, elderly wise sage in India, and he's on the Ganges River. And as he contemplates the river, he looks down into the water and he sees a scorpion. So this wise sage reaches in, tries to rescue the scorpion, and the scorpion stings him. So the sage suddenly drops the scorpion and waits a bit, sees the scorpion still struggling in the water, about to drown. So the sage reaches in again to rescue the scorpion, and the scorpion stings him again. And the sage drops the scorpion again. Now a bystander is watching this and says, "Holy One, why do you keep trying to rescue the scorpion? He's just going to keep stinging you over and over again." And the sage says, "It is in the dharma of the scorpion to sting me, but it's in the dharma of the human being to rescue." So dharma is about what is our real inner nature. Yes, we human beings can be very selfish. We can be very egocentric, but we're not scorpions forever. We have the capacity to evolve. We have the capacity to use our free will wisely. And the whole point of karma and the cause and effect is it is a way of limiting the extent of our wrongdoing until eventually we begin to learn. Therefore, as Eknath Easwaran points out, in this sense, life is like a school. One can learn, one can graduate, one can skip a grade or stay behind. As long as a debt of karma remains, however, a person has to keep coming back for further education. This is the basis of samsara, the cycle of birth and death. Joanna de Angelis, in her book, Family Constellation, a wonderful book, emphasizes that the family, which is the vehicle through which reincarnation occurs, is a school. It's like a big workshop. Many of the important lessons we learn in life or struggle with in some way have often happened through our families. And it's no accident that in the Andre Luiz books, there are many examples of carefully planned reincarnations that have to do with who's going back into the same family, former enemies coming back as parent and child, and the configuration of that makes a big difference. And one of the major themes of action and reaction is a couple things. One of them is that as long as we have a debt of some kind from our past, we have to pay it off. We have to pay off the debt in full. Now, how that happens varies a great deal depending on the individual. But whatever we do, whatever debts we incur, we have to work them through. And this is played out in action and reaction, and it's demonstrated through one of the central plot lines of the book, Action and Reaction. Let me explain what I mean by that. As I mentioned, the director of the Mansion of Peace is Druso. His leading assistant is Silas, who teaches Andre and Ilario by showing them several cases. They do a lot of good. Druso is a hands-on kind of director. He's not sitting up in some, elitist office bestowing his orders to everyone. He gets down in there in the trenches. Druso greets many of the arrivals from the lower zones personally. He counsels them personally. He cares about them. He's trying to help them. And Silas is the same way. Silas is the one that shows Andre and Ilario several examples of spirits that are suffering, often ones that incarnated back on Earth after being at the Mansion of Peace, who are now possibly in trouble, and he's there to help them out. And I mentioned that Silas helps out Antonio Olimpio's family. But there is a big revelation at the end of this book. And so forgive me if you haven't read this book, but here comes the big spoiler alert, which is we learn at the end that Druso is actually Silas's father. And we find out in a couple of ways. Silas helps Antonio Olimpio, the spirit, the individual who killed his two brothers because he was greedy for all that land in Brazil. Silas helps Antonio Olimpio's family by visiting the ranch, and he's going to get closer to the spirits of the two obsessor brothers, who are very skillful obsessors and very shrewd and absolutely determined to get their revenge as much as they possibly can. So Silas is very wise. With Andre and Ilario accompanying him, they meet the two brothers. Silas lets the two brothers think that he's an obsessor like they are. And then when Silas articulates how the process of obsession works, because the two brothers know a great deal, he impresses them because they think, wow, this guy really knows what he's doing. And they start to trust him. Then Silas does something very wise. He doesn't sit there and lecture the two brothers about, oh, you shouldn't obsess, you should be working for the good. No. What he does is he first lets them think that he's one of them, and then he finally starts to tell his own story. So what was his own story? Silas, in his last incarnation, was born into a wealthy family. His father, Druso, had a lot of money. He was trained to be a lawyer, but because he was wealthy, he didn't have to work. So he didn't really. Druso just liked to live in the home, enjoy life, and he loved to read. He had a big library, and he liked to, spend his time with his books. And his wife, Silas's mother, was a Roman Catholic, very religious, very involved with her church. And she tried and tried and tried to get her husband and her son, Silas, to be involved in the church with her. Neither one of them was interested. Silas admits that from an early age, he only cared really about money, and he wasn't interested in spiritual matters. Well, eventually his mother discarnates, and Druso remarries to a beautiful young woman named Ida. Ida is about 30 years old. Druso is now 60. Ida's pretty. She's about Silas's age. And Silas sees his new stepmother as a threat. He wants his father's money for himself, and now she's going to get in the way of that. He sees her as a gold digger. And he's trying to figure out how to get rid of her. He even thinks about possibly killing her, but he doesn't want to do that. So finally, he sees the opportunity. What happens is that Silas meets the cousin of Ida. Ida's cousin is a gambler, likes to drink. He's a womanizer. And before Ida married Druso, he was interested in his cousin. He was trying to court her and so forth. Silas sees the opportunity, and he does everything in his power to make sure that Ida, his stepmother, Ida and her cousin spend as much time with each other as he can possibly arrange. This goes on for about a year. And then finally, Ida, who's constantly being seduced by her cousin and resists at first, but she finally gives in, and they start having an affair. And this occurs in Druso's home. Druso, meanwhile, is 60, starting to get into bad health. And Silas, his son, goes to his father, Druso, and says to him, "Do you know what Ida's doing right now?" And Druso doesn't believe it at first, and he wants proof that she's unfaithful to him. So Silas leads his father into another room where his wife and her cousin are in bed together. So Druso's very upset. Ida's very upset. Ida's cousin doesn't see Druso as a threat. It's not going to beat him up. So he just gets out of there fast. And after Druso and Ida fight, she retreats into her bedroom. She's ashamed. And then she starts becoming ill. And 2 weeks later, she discarnates. Then Druso, who's in bad health, is near the end of his life soon after. And before Druso discarnates, he confesses to Silas, his son. The reason Ida died when she did was because he was poisoning her. As soon as he found out that his wife was unfaithful to him, he started poisoning her bit by bit until she passed away 2 weeks later. Therefore, Druso feels very guilty. And Silas, who now has all the money for himself after his father discarnates, he too begins to really feel awful. He wanted her out of the way. He didn't necessarily want to kill her. And even so, sometimes we want something so bad that when we actually get it, we realize it wasn't as important as we thought, especially depending upon how we get what we want. And Silas never really feels at peace with himself. He tries to go to Europe and he enjoys lavish meals and can see art museums and so forth, and it doesn't make him happy. Eventually, he goes back to Brazil, and he doesn't want to go back to the house where where Druso lived and Ida lived and his mother lived. So he stays with a friend, and his health is declining. He's been drinking. He hasn't been taking good care of himself. He's having stomach problems. Finally, he takes some bicarbonate, thinking that it's bicarbonate, and it's actually poison. This was an accident. And he accidentally poisons himself, so he dies the same way his stepmother did. And everybody who knows Silas thinks, well, he committed suicide, unfortunately. Now, Silas had to live with the consequences of this in the spirit world, and he suffered for a while, as did Druso. But eventually, both of them were rescued and brought into the Mansion of Peace. They arrived there because they felt remorse. They had remorse. Many of the spirits in the lower zones don't have remorse. So they recover at the Mansion of Peace. And finally, after many, many years, they show a lot of capability. They work very hard. And Druso becomes the director of the Mansion of Peace, and Silas becomes his assistant. Now, when Andre and Ilario first find out about Silas's past, they're shocked because they're looking at Silas and they see Druso and they're these very wise spirits. But the point is, they're not saints. These are two who have their own expiations to go through, their own trials to go through, their own education that they need to go through. They're not a pair of high-level spirits who've been up in the upper echelons of the spirit world for centuries. No. And one of the points Action and Reaction makes without saying this is that the Mansion of Peace is kind of like Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous is created by former recovered alcoholics to help alcoholics who need recovery. And the reason it's set up that way is because those who are suffering from alcoholism can receive help from those who've been there themselves. They know exactly what it's like to be an alcoholic. And if you know anything about recovered alcoholics, once you're an alcoholic, you're always an alcoholic. You can't go back. But the whole point of Alcoholics Anonymous is that it's made up of individuals who have a lot of compassion for this disease. Druso and Silas have a lot of compassion for all those spirits suffering in the lower zones. They want to help them. And then at the end of the book, Action and Reaction, there is the major revelation. They receive spirits, and one day a spirit shows up, and it turns out to be the spirit of Druso's ex-second wife, Ida, Silas's stepmother. And they are overjoyed when she arrives at the Mansion of Peace. Silas drops a hint when he tells Andre and Ilario and the brothers of Antonio Olympio about his story. And by the way, Silas helps to convince these two obsessor brothers of Antonio Olympio to stop, to come into the Mansion of Peace, to start working for the good. So Silas does a lot of good. When Silas and Druso finally reconnect with Ida, they're overjoyed. They've been waiting for this moment for a long, long time. And they thank God. And what it means is that once they've reconnected with her, then Druso and Silas can now leave the Mansion of Peace, and they will begin the process of reincarnation. Druso will go back first. He will meet and marry again his first wife, the Roman Catholic, who was very religious. And eventually, Silas and Ida will come back as their children. So Silas and Ida, who were stepson or stepmother and stepson, are going to come back as brother and sister. And in this way, this family can continue working on the karma or the reaction to the action that they all went through. The fact that the Mansion of Peace does all this work, it's part of a greater purpose. It's certainly to work for the good. But I'm going to start to wrap up this presentation by ending with some comments from another high-level spirit, or a high-level spirit named Minister Sanzio, who appears in this book. And the Minister Sanzio shows up at the Mansion of Peace from time to time, and he basically helps approve the recommendations that Druso and others make for planned reincarnations of those who've been staying at the Mansion of Peace, who were rescued from the lower zones. And Minister Sanzio gives makes some comments, and then finally Andre and Ilario have a little private time with Minister Sanzio, and they want to ask him about karma, because again, Andre and Ilario are at the Mansion of Peace to study karma. That's the whole premise of this book, Action and Reaction. And Minister Sanzio points out, no one can escape divine justice, especially since our conscience, as it awakens to the sanctity of life, yearns to rightly pay all the debts that it has acquired regarding God's goodness. Goes on to say, in order to better understand karma, or, quote, the account of destiny created by us, there's a hint, we must remember that the governor of life also has a bookkeeping system that is expressed in the mechanics of inalienable justice. So why is that? And he says, if in the circle of earthly activities, any organization needs to set up such a system in order to perform the tasks that are its responsibility, God's organization, which entails the whole universe, would not be able to function without order either. In other words, reincarnation has a certain order to it, carrying out the effects of karma. And if you think about the Andre Luis books, the first book, No Solar, it's got all these ministries. It's a very organized place. The Mansion of Peace is a place of organization. And the purpose of this organization is that if you didn't have these kinds of organization, this structure, the carrying out divine laws, if it wasn't carried out through some kind of organization, it would all fall apart. And Minister Sanzio's driving this point home. And he goes on to say, when it comes to the law of cause and effect, it is essential not to forget that everything in life, from the remotest constellation to the tiniest subatomic particles, belong to God, whose unfathomable designs can change, renew, destroy, or rebuild everything that has been made. So everything is on loan to us, which is pointed out here. We are simply users of nature, which manifests the Lord's treasures, and we are responsible for all of our actions as soon as we possess a little discernment. To wrap up, we are part of an overall process. When we choose to rebel, we can go through what feels like punishment, but it's really meant to be education or educative. And one of the ways to think about it is when we choose to be attuned to the good, when we work for the good, when we actively work for the good, we start connecting ourselves to a much larger and more harmonious process overall. And the more we work for that, the more it helps us in return. When we choose to rebel against it, when we isolate ourselves and say, no, I'm not part of any of this, when we insist on being selfish, then we cut ourselves off. But our ability to connect to the good depends on us, and we can do it anytime we choose to, once we're willing to let go of those sides of us that want to engage in wrongdoing. Or as it's stated in the laws of progress, pride and rebelling, or pride and selfishness, are the two biggest obstacles of progress, which is emphasized in the Spirit's book. I'm going to share with you is the one last quote from this. This is from the Savetashvatara Upanishad. Those who act without thought of personal profit and lead a well-disciplined life discover in course of time the divine principle that all forms of life are one. They work in the service of the Lord and are freed from the law of karma. So again, when we realize we're all part of a greater whole, and we don't try to fight against it, but we try to be in harmony with it, then we can begin to work through karma. We can work through and achieve a better and longer lasting sense of happiness by embracing love and compassion and goodness. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for that wonderful presentation. You lay it out in a simple but in a very clear manner. There are many things when you were speaking that I thought about early on was my experiences in life, and I've been the person doing this. And then as I've gone through inner transformation, I see it on the other side where someone always complains about something and they want help. But then you go and you provide them help. But as soon as you're providing the help, they skip to another issue because they really don't want the help. They just want to stay in chaos and complain. And that came to mind really early on when you were talking about all the spirits outside the mansion, and the spirits that they allow in. And it's those spirits who really do want the help and are willing to accept the help and not just move to another issue to escape the help. This reminds me to remind everyone that our wonderful sister, Sunshine, is presenting on inner transformation, and this subject speaks to me on inner transformation. So I just wanted to remind everyone of the classes that Sunshine is teaching on. Thank you again, Peter. And the floor is open for anyone who wishes to talk about your experience and what this presentation meant to you.
I deeply enjoyed your lecture, Peter.
Thank you, Sunshine.
Yes, also to get the summary of action and reaction from a slightly different perspective, and I loved it. It's very enriching. And I particularly enjoyed the reminder that our life challenges are educational. If we can just, this one lesson, right? If we can download that, then we'll open our hearts, align ourselves, and enjoy life better, even in its downs, which is always more challenging for us. So thank you so much, Peter, really.
Thank you.
I did appreciate,
Peter, I also, oh, sorry, go ahead, Charles.
I did appreciate the visual aids that you present in the beginning. It's kind of a weary sensation of going there. So that was a great contribution. Put into view perspective what we're talking about is not just a fictional reading. So thank you. That was good.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would also say that I appreciate it very, very much, Peter. Thank you. This book is beautiful, and I really like the way that you also brought like other perspectives to the book, and I really enjoyed the story that you shared about the scorpion. That it's in the scorpion dharma to sting, and is in the human dharma, if I correctly noted this, to rescue. And I think that this is exactly like what you're saying. When we are in harmony with the divine laws, it's easy for us not to derail from the things, because like we are a reaction on everything that we did in the past. So of course that if we are educating ourselves, we are going to face things that really brings up things that we like either are painful or hurt us or damage us in some level. So I think it's really interesting to bring up this the importance that we are in good frequency with our inner divine light, and then trying to find how we can transform ourselves. I totally agree with you, Brian, that inner transformation is the path. So thank you for reminding that, Peter. Really good. Thank you.
Thank you.
So wonderful topic in the book. Very wise. It shows to this time that we are right here on Earth in the pandemic situation, bringing this all together. And we will see that is not a punishment there, but it is the law of reaction, action and reaction. What the humankind have done to Earth, what we have done to each other. And I thought all this the teaching is teaching us that is every action must have a reaction,
Mhm.
and that will come back to who? To us,
Right.
to our own selves.
Mhm.
As you told, very clear, explained the summary of this book. We will putting ourselves in our own lives this lifetime. We don't need to go back what we have done in other lives, because if you read very carefully our lives here and now, and we will see what we have been done to ourselves in other times, in other lives, no?
Mhm.
So, but the merciful Father and his merciful love to us, it is free. And he really trusts in us and believes in us. And he knows without punishment, he does not punish us. He love us so much that he gave us and give us many opportunities to
Mhm.
come back again and to try again and to do better. So it is a wonderful that you show at the end that the father and the son was the director and a great workers of the mansion, and they were sharing their weaknesses, their dark
Mhm.
side on the other life and their other experience. So in the spiritual world, they do have the opportunity to redeem themselves and
Mhm.
to correct themselves and to be an example for others. That is why we are here today.
Right.
None of us here is a saint. No,
Mhm.
we have the great opportunity. The mentor today, Dr. Paulo, was reminding us to, it is not just a one day preparation of the life, because our service is dedicated to spiritual healing.
Mhm.
So we must have to prepare it every day. So the life have to be most, when we are conscious, like the father and the son was conscious of their mistakes, and
Mhm.
then they start to work themselves and to be in service to the Lord, to help others, to rescue others. And so every day we have to rescue our own selves from
Mhm.
our mistakes, and to be up to be an example to others. And God will be using us to be in service to in his beautiful mission of the light,
Mhm.
because here, like you today, is bringing this message to all of us, to our heart, and make us to meditate what we have been done and what we are doing right now. And we offer all the blessed opportunity that we have in the spiritual community. It is that we have all the studying, the classes, the books, and the teachings of the spiritism, and the great ones, like you say, Hinduism, the White Brotherhood, the Universal White Brotherhood Fraternity, that have amazing books on the soul, on the action and reaction. So in our daily life and the beautiful nature, I'm so thankful for your presence, for your opportunity, the opportunity you are giving to us to reflect, deeply reflect in our soul today. Thanks so much.
Thank you. One of the points action reaction certainly demonstrates is that that kind of work, a reparative work or spiritual progress, can happen either there or here. It could go either way. So we don't have to wait to come back here in order to work on our progress.
We will come back better. No, I believe that.
Yes. Yeah.
I believe in deep on my
Right.
soul. I have experience in regression naturally,
Mhm.
and I was a suicide, and I don't know how lives ago. And about what I remember, the regression was my recovering in the spiritual world. I had that time, had not read none of the books of spiritism yet. I was very
Mhm.
Catholic, and
Mhm.
I was a catechist, and
Mhm.
I saw myself in a. It was very interesting for me. It was like a dimension of the light that you show, and in this beautiful, huge college, like apostolic college, like we have in this Catholic college. And I saw myself modified, getting better, transforming, and prepared to come back to earth.
Mm.
It is amazing the opportunity
Mhm.
we all have. God
Yes.
is amazing, Father.
Mm.
I think the book brings into perspective not only this, let's say, romantic aspect of our stories, our consequence of the choices we make, but also alerts us to its physics of that everything that we do, even in thought, has a reaction. So
Mhm.
we are responsible for what we are creating because there is a consequence to whatever we emit, whatever we project. So I think it's a huge alert, and I think we need to be very conscious of it because even in my deepest thought, I am responsible for its consequences.
Mhm.
All right. Well, thank you, Peter, for your presentation. Every time you speak at our center, um, you help us in our evolution. I know I'll be thinking about inner transformation throughout the week, and I'm about to um, end a book that I'm reading. And wondering what book next to read, and Action Reaction is on my shelf. I know you
Ah,
told
okay.
told us the story, but
Mhm.
I almost feel like God is telling me to read this book now.
There's a lot I wasn't able to include either because there's that much in the book. So it's, just, it's definitely, you should read it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
impossible to capture the entire book in one presentation, I would say.
Well, let's take 5 minutes break, and then we'll come back for virtual passes, and then we'll have a meditation provided by Tanya. So 5 minutes. It's 11:08 California time right now. So we'll come back at 11:13, and make sure that you have your water, so the spirits can work on that as well, so that you can drink from the bottle as the week goes on. So see you